Okay, how we all doing? You alive? Yeah. It's that point in the semester. So there's not a lot there is a lot going on, but not a lot of things to attend right now. So tomorrow night in here, Dr. Kilmeyer is giving her recital at 7:30. So that would count for your professional woodwind. I encourage you all to come see that. If you don't know, Dr. Kilmeyer is our professor of oboe and bassoon. So that should be a great concert, and she will be collaborating with Dr. Song on the piano. Saturday is a big day for the marching band. The game starts at 3:30. 3:30 is the game. Concert should happen in the middle of that. And then you guys have, which one do you have on Saturday night? Castle. 9:20 p.m. I'll be in bed. Yeah. So, also, if you're not in marching band, those of you who are new to Johnson City or just new to paying attention to musical events may not know that we actually have two professional orchestras in the community. So we have Johnson City Symphony Orchestra and Symphony of the Mountains. Both of those groups have free student tickets for students that show up. So the Symphony of the Mountains has a concert on Saturday. That's at the Eastman Toy F. Reed Center, the big auditorium in Kingsport. So if you want to go hear a professional orchestra concert, you can hear that on Saturday night. I encourage you to go check that out too as well. That's all we got for this weekend. Anybody else have anything you want to announce for this weekend? Cool. Next Thursday, after the next symposium, next Thursday night is the concert bands, Wind Ensemble and Concert Band, and it should be super cool. Wind Ensemble is collaborating with our aerial dance program here at ETSU. If you didn't know we had that, we do. It's super cool. So I hope that you will put that on your calendar now for a week from tonight, and that's 7:30 over in the Grand Hall, and that's going to be really exciting collaboration between multiple departments. Anything you want to announce for next week? All right, y'all hanging in there? There's a lot of illness going around, so please try and keep yourself healthy. If you know that you've been exposed, I encourage you to feel free to put on a mask. We have a lot of people doing that right now. So we're definitely experiencing some COVID spike again. So do what you can to keep yourself well. Kayla, do you have something?
There is an opera in Knoxville October 14th and 15th. So if you need an opera credit right now, that would be a good time to go do that.
Yeah. Yes, and the opera credits are a little tricky, but Knoxville is a professional opera company. It's October 13th, 14th, to 15th, and that's, I don't remember which show they're doing. I should know this. I just got an email about it yesterday. But you can check that out. That is ticketed, and that's obviously on your own. So you can go, if you want to drive down to Knoxville, that's a good time. If you haven't gotten a ticket yet for the United States Air Force Band and Singing Sergeants, I encourage you to do that. Again, those are free, but you do have to have a ticket. Last time I looked, there were over 850 of them gone, so that will sell out. And I encourage you to get a ticket to attend that. But you do need to get a free ticket, so just log into the website, Martin Center website, and grab one of those. Some of you were asking about football game, getting into the football game. Marching band people, can you help others? How do they get in? Yeah. Students. Okay, so you got to have your ID, but if you want to go watch the band, you don't have to pay to get a ticket, right? Okay, so everybody go grab one of those, and then you can wander in. They usually stop checking tickets by the time halftime rolls around anyways. They just let people wander in and out. But and you do have to go through security a lot of times, so you can't bring like a big old backpack or something in there too. So it's kind of like here, they want to keep it safe. So just be aware of that on Saturday. It should be really nice weather on Saturday, so go check out the football game before it gets too cold later in the season. All right, our guest today, how many of you have ever taken an Alexander class with Dr. Dedman? Lots of you. Okay. So, Alexander technique, I'm not going to explain it to you because I will get it wrong, but our guest today is going to explain lots to you, and he's also going to talk to you about his personal experience. So I'm going to let him introduce himself in terms of his own background. But I took an Alexander technique way back in undergrad. For me, yes, it's been around that long. So I really think it's helpful. I really think it's something that helps all of us, regardless of what we perform, whether we're sitting as a pianist or whether we're standing as a vocalist or anywhere in between. So I encourage you to really lock into this, and maybe it will inspire you to study a little bit more with Dr. Dedman after our guest today is gone. So please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Shawn Copeland.
Hi, can you hear, is this the right distance so that you can hear me? Okay. It's very strange to walk out on stage without my clarinet. Let me just start with what I'm going to talk about today, and first say that I'm a clarinetist. I'm professor of clarinet at the University of Idaho. That's my first form of communication is to play music. I've been a performing musician since I was 3. I'm quite comfortable on stage with a musical instrument in my hand, but otherwise in life I'm generally a wallflower. I like to sit in the back. I like to watch and notice. I don't like to be in the front, and it's a very strange thing for me to be up here and talking specifically about what I'm going to talk to you about today. As I was introduced, I am an Alexander Technique teacher, and what I want to share with you today is the journey of my life thus far, and the opportunities that have presented themselves that seemed strange at the time, but have really prepared me for the future that I'm in at the moment. And I'm doing this because I think that if I were in your situation, or when I was in your situation, I would have benefited greatly from someone sharing this story. And so I think it can be very valuable for you, but it's also a bit strange for me to be up here and talking about myself. I don't really like to do that. Again, I'm generally quiet. So I'd like to start with a question for you. And what I'd like for you to think about for a minute is, what would you do if you woke up tomorrow and you could no longer play your instrument? What would you do if you woke up tomorrow and you learned that your instrument was potentially fatally harmful to your body? Who would you be? It's kind of a daunting question, right? And it really makes you think about, who am I? We often say things like, to be a musician is a lifestyle. It's not a job. It's who I am. What happens if you can't make music anymore? Who are you then? It's kind of scary, right? Yeah. So here's the story. When I was your age, I remember sometime in my first semester of college, I came in and I said to my teacher, I want to do what you do. I want to be a college professor. I want to teach clarinet at a university. I knew from 18 years old that was what I wanted to do. I started playing piano when I was 3. I picked up clarinet when I was 9. It has always been what I did to perform. Going through the COVID quarantine was one of the scariest moments of my life, because it was the longest that I had ever been without performing in my entire life. And it felt like a fish out of water. Bless you. It felt very much like a fish out of water. So I did the typical undergraduate degree in music performance. And while I was in the midst of that, I went to the Brevard Music Center for a summer festival. And I was introduced to the Alexander technique there. I went to a workshop. I believe I've seen some of you in various workshops over the last day or two, so if you've heard this story, I apologize. I went to a workshop, and there were two teachers who had just come into Brevard, North Carolina to move there, and they wanted to come to the festival and introduce the technique and potentially get some students. So they offered this workshop, and again, I'm a wallflower. I grabbed all of my friends because I was terrified that I would be the only nerd who wanted to go see what this was, and that I'd be the only one there. So I got some people to go with me, and we went, and they did their thing. They showed us what Alexander technique was, and it was pretty cool. And then they started telling their stories in a very similar way to what I'm doing right now. And the woman, Ingrid, said when she was in her late teens, she contracted polio. And it took the use of her legs away from her. She was confined to crutches and braces in her early 20s and was about to be fully confined to a wheelchair when she had her first Alexander lesson. And at this point, we all kind of cued into the fact that she'd been teaching us for about an hour, and there was no visible sign, no limp or anything. And she pulled up the legs of her pants, and she showed us she wasn't wearing braces. And she said, my study of the Alexander technique and my training allowed me to regain the use of my legs. And I was like, I got to know about that. That's really cool. And thus began my study of the Alexander technique. And I studied it all through my undergrad. I read a lot of books. I had private lessons. I worked on using the technique within my own body. How many of you know what the Alexander technique is? Okay. So I figured Dr. Dedman and I are good friends, and I figured this is an educated audience. But for those of you who don't know, Alexander was an actor who, in the turn of the century, lost his voice when he was performing, and nobody could figure out why. And so he stopped acting, and he figured out some very important things about the human body and how the human body organizes in movement. And what he discovered was that when he went to speak, he was interfering with what we'll call the primary organizing principle of movement in the body. And the way that he was interfering with that disrupted the way his voice worked. And when he went to restore that within himself, he was immediately confronted with the power of habit and what habit does in our body and how habits are formed and how they work. And so he had to develop a process, which is the technique, for giving him space to choose a different response to a stimulus. The way that our nervous system works is very much like stimulus and reaction, and it happens really quickly. That the deep center of our brain, which is where habits are stored, runs at about 200 miles an hour. The front of our brain, where we think and where we talk to ourselves from, runs at about 2 miles an hour. So it takes a little bit of time for our thinking to interrupt the automatic processes of our bodies, and habits are automatic processes. And so he developed a way of creating space between a stimulus so that he could turn a stimulus from a reaction into a response. And that space allowed him the choice to do that. So Alexander technique is a process, a way of being, a way of noticing what's happening around you and noticing how you are responding to that and making a conscious choice about how you want to move forward in response to that stimulus. Now, most of us use that process to help restore balance and coordination within the body, because he also made an important physical discovery about the body. But that technique is very useful and in every aspect of your life, in terms of how you respond to things, your personal interactions, the decisions that you make. It offers you the ability to pause and think and notice. And that's going to become very important as the rest of the story goes on. So when I went to grad school, let me back up. When I finished my undergrad, I hated the clarinet. If I played for more than 30 minutes, I broke down in tears. I was so over it. I was done. I was burnt out. I was ready to go move to Orlando, Florida, and go clubbing 5 nights a week and have a job and make money and buy clothes and spend money and not be a poor college musician anymore. We know that story, right? And so that's what I did. I put the clarinet in the closet. I went and got a job. I made $45,000 a year, which at that time was a tremendous amount of money because I was 22 years old. I bought a lot of shoes. I went out dancing in the clubs of Orlando 5 nights a week. Had a great time. It's amazing that I still have a liver. But, because life happens. And at that time, my dad said, you know what, Shawn, if you go get a useful degree, I'll pay for you to get a master's degree. Maybe think about getting a master's degree, in business administration, an MBA. So I did. I went and started to get enrolled and started in an MBA. And I very quickly realized that I hadn't sat in a math class for 6 years. And MBA is heavy math. And my last math class was calculus, my junior year of high school. I count to 4. That's it. Counting to 5 is 2 plus 3. You get my drift, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's pretty much all I do, and I press buttons. So thinking like that was not me at that point in time. And so I quickly changed to a master's degree in arts administration and arts management. And I finished that degree, and that took about 3 years. And while I was doing that, I rediscovered my love for music. And I started working with a clarinet professor at Florida State, Frank Kowalski, who put me back together. I went for my first lesson, and he said to me, I'm not really sure what you're doing right now, but this is what you're supposed to be doing. And if you would like, I'll work with you, and we'll get you going again. And so I drove from Orlando to Tallahassee every 3 weeks, which is a 6-hour drive. And I would go and have a 2 or 3 hour lesson with him and drive another 6 hours home. And I did that for about a year. And then I went on to graduate school in North Carolina at University of North Carolina in Greensboro. And I stayed there and did my master's and doctorate. And it was at that time that I met Marcia Paladin, who would become my Alexander teacher and mentor. And in my first lesson with her, she offered to train me to become a teacher, which, if you've ever looked at becoming an Alexander teacher, the training is 3 years. It's traditionally 1,200 to 1,600 hours of training. You go to school 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. It's very intense, and the schools are usually in places like New York City and Philadelphia and San Francisco and LA, not in Greensboro, North Carolina. And certainly not structured in a way that you could also go to music school at the same time. So it was a really great opportunity, and I took it. And I did all of my doctoral research in Alexander technique and its application to clarinet pedagogy, and thought that I was really set to get a job, to get a college teaching job. Here I am. I have a master's degree in business or nonprofit management, a doctorate in clarinet, and an Alexander Technique certificate. Everybody has said, oh, you're a shoo-in for any job you apply for. This is 2007. Anybody remember what happened in 2007, 2008? Massive economic crash. No jobs. No jobs in clarinet for 12 years. All that happened was the people who already had jobs moved from job to job to job to job. But jobs for entry-level people didn't exist. So I needed to figure out a way to support myself, right? Lo and behold, that business degree became quite useful. And I formed a chamber ensemble. I got into several symphonies and had quite a happy career playing auxiliary clarinet and principal clarinet all over North Carolina. And was teaching Alexander Technique at some universities. I built the Alexander program at UNCG that's still there now, and was teaching adjunct clarinet at various places. And then I get the job at the University of Idaho, and I moved to Moscow, Idaho. How many of you know where that is? Neither did I. How do you know where that is?
My mom went to grad school there.
Fantastic. Have you ever been there?
I lived there for 3 years.
And do you like it?
I don't remember it. I was 8 to 0 to 3.
Got it. Moscow, Idaho. It's in the Panhandle. I live very close to Canada. It's very cold. I'm from Florida. Very cold. And very different there. And everything went great. I got tenure. I did the things that I was supposed to do. I recorded 3 CDs. I built the program. I went from 3 students to 18 students in 2 years. Like, I did what I was supposed to do, and everything's sort of planning out to be great, just like I had planned. And then I'm in Florida one summer, and I'm teaching a clarinet clinic, and it starts on a Sunday. And we wake up Sunday morning, and we turn on the news, and we hear that there's been a massive shooting at Pulse. And Pulse is where I grew up. I've spent many nights in Pulse. It's one of the major clubs of Orlando. If you haven't figured out yet, very openly gay human being. And I grew up there. That's my home. Absolutely, unimaginably devastated. If that had been 10, 12 years ago, I would have been there that night. So this is one of those moments where everything changes for you, right? And kind of leading into this moment, I had a friend who was a student with me in my undergrad, Carlos Velez. So if you're sitting next to a composer, this is the moment when those relationships begin. And he had been writing music for me since 2002. I called him, and he's also gay, also Puerto Rican descent, and also from Orlando. So we were sort of very much struggling with how to respond to this. And I called him and I said, I have this idea. I want to do a CD of all of the works that you've written for me. And I want you to write one more piece. I want you to write the big piece for this opus. I want you to write a sonata for me, for clarinet and piano. And I want it to be about us. I want the first movement to be called Firestone, which was the big club dance, 2,000-person dance club in Orlando. I said, I want the second movement to be called Southern Nights, which was the cabaret drag club. And I want the third movement to be pulse. And that's what we did. He wrote this piece for me. It's the first time that he had ever turned to the music of his culture to write about, as opposed to writing white traditional academic music or Western music. And so he wrote this piece, and I recorded it. And this is all leading up to COVID. This was in the year or two before COVID. I toured, and I performed this piece along with the Clarinet Sonata by Leonard Bernstein, and this really amazing piece of music called Eternal Garden by David Maslanka, which is a piece where he is working through some of the most atrocious events in human history, like the dropping of the atomic bomb. And so it's light, if you catch my drift. It's a very intense piece of music. And something quite unexpected happened as I was doing this tour. After each performance, people, would come up and congratulate me, and there would always be a group of students, about 10 or 12 people, who wanted to sit and talk with me. And they wanted to start sharing their stories of their identity and their struggles with their sexuality and their gender, and how they felt and continue to feel regarding the level of safety that they experience in the world now as a result of Pulse. And this happened everywhere I went. And I'll share with you something very important about leading into the premiere of this piece of music. As I was getting closer and closer to the premiere, I realized that I couldn't walk out on stage as Dr. Copeland. I couldn't put a suit and tie on and be that. I'm performing music that's commemorating my people who I identify with, and we're celebrating those lives that were lost, who went there that night to live their truth and to be together in a community. I had to walk out on stage as me, and not the academic version of me. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? So it in a sense, it was like I was coming out all over again. But I was coming out in my profession as who I am, which was, and my sexuality was front and center. My identity was front and center, which was a whole unbelievable process to get to. So the fact that people were coming up and sharing their stories with me was was an unexpected and extremely powerful experience for me. There was great gratitude that was happening in that moment, and great sharing. And I realized that I needed to continue this in some way. And so as we went into the pandemic and the quarantine, I took that opportunity to do a certificate program in diversity and inclusion, and learned all about that work. I did the quarantine in Seattle, where my partner lives, and which meant that I was 1 block away from the BLM riots in the Chaz district that happened in Seattle, if you remember that time. So I had a front row seat to what was happening in response to George Floyd and everything that was happening in our world at that time. So there was a lot of things mixing at this time. And I got the opportunity to really think about inclusion and teaching from an inclusive point of view, particularly within the Alexander technique, and talking about the body and talking about identity, that our movement, which is ultimately what I'm teaching about, movement is a reflection of our lived experience. And all of that comes out in the way that we express ourselves. This was a whole different change for me in really thinking about what I was teaching. We come out of the pandemic. I'm sitting backstage, getting ready for the first recital. Post pandemic, we're still wearing masks at this time, so I had to wear a mask while I was playing on stage. That was really fun. At least I didn't have to wear or put the bag around the clarinet thing. That would have been really fun. But I did have to wear the bell cover thing, which was really stupid. But that's what we did. I was sitting backstage getting ready for the concert, and I had my iPad in front of me. And it was off because I was just warming up. And so it was reflecting back as a mirror. And I was sitting there playing, and I looked in it, and I saw something in my neck that I hadn't seen before. When I went to play, my neck bulged out to the right. I've been teaching Alexander technique for 20 years at this point. I work a lot with musicians, particularly with musicians who are injured. I know what this is, and I know what I need to do. So I schedule an appointment with an otolaryngologist, an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And I go in, and I show him what's happening, and we do 6 months worth of tests, all sorts of really interesting tests that you never want to do. And then I go in for the results of this, and I find out that what's happened is due to the pressure of playing clarinet and the internal pressure, the mucus lining of my esophagus has separated from the muscular wall, and it's filling up and bulging out in my neck. And this will potentially become life-threatening, but right now it's not. But I need surgery. And because of the location of it, there's about an 80% chance that when I have this surgery that I will have one of three things happen, which are I will either have paralysis of the right side of my vocal cords, paralysis of the right side of my esophagus, or they won't be able to seal my esophagus once they cut this piece out. And there won't be enough resilience in the muscular wall for it to seal so that I can safely swallow. So I would likely be on a feeding tube for the rest of my life, which doesn't sound very exciting at 46 years old, to walk around with my lunch on a pole. So he says, if you stop playing clarinet now, we can put this off for 25 years or so. What? If I stop? Who am I? I'm a musician. This is my dream. This is what I've worked for my entire life. I've just gotten tenure. I'm at the height of my career. I'm at the height of my playing ability. I feel like I'm just coming into my own, and I've found out who I am on stage and what my role is in my community, and I have to stop. Complete catastrophe happens. 18 months of a lot of tears, a lot of searching for who you are, a lot of, gosh, if I just put my feet on the floor today, it's a good day. If I just show up, it's a good day. And then I figured out that I have more to offer. I have other things that I can do. And so last October, I opened my own personal private business to train musicians and teachers to teach Alexander technique and body mapping to other musicians so that these injuries don't continue to perpetuate themselves. And that business is now almost full-time for me, which is great because I'm about to go into my last semester as an academic professor. I'm retiring at the end of this year, and I will no longer, I'm selling my clarinets and selling everything I own, basically, my office, and just walking out of there with my books and leaving all the rest of it there. So I'm saying all this to you to sort of, I can look back and I can go, oh, yeah, there's a reason why I did that music business degree. Oh, yeah, there's a reason why I trained as an Alexander teacher. These sort of not important, insignificant moments, choices, and opportunities have prepared me for what my future is going to be. I have the skills. I realized in this, in this moment of darkness, I have the skills to start my own business, to run my own business. I know how to form an LLC. I know what the difference between an LLC is and a 501c3, and I know how to do those things. I know how to do my taxes. I know how to build a budget and do all the accounting that I need to do for my business. I know how to do marketing. I don't know anything about social media marketing. I'm finding a lot about that. I'm going to be creating a TikTok channel here pretty soon, which I'm kind of nervous about, but it turns out that the best way to communicate with you all is through TikTok, or your generation. So we will adapt because that's what we do. So I offer this story to you to say that you don't know what's coming, but your life will present you with the opportunities that you need in order to prepare you for your future. But there may come a day when you suddenly realize that your future is not going to be what you expected it to be. It's not going to be what you trained for it to be. And most of us will experience that in some form. Hopefully it won't be traumatic or life-altering, but you will be presented with opportunities and be able to make choices. And as I look back on those things, I realize that if I hadn't done those things, I wouldn't be prepared for what's coming. Does that make sense? And so we talk in our field a lot about like having an entrepreneurial spirit and what is entrepreneurship, that spirit of creating something that didn't exist before, and needing to develop that in the young undergraduate students of today. I say to you, pay attention to that. These things are important. What your future will look like is different from what I thought my future was going to look like, and is different than what my teacher thought my future was going to look like. We don't know what's coming for you. We don't know what the music industry and education is going to be like, even next year, but certainly not 4 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. But it's the skills that you're learning now and the relationships that you're making with the people that you're sitting next to that will shape your future and create opportunities for you in the future that you can't possibly even dream will be important until you get there. And it's who you are that will allow you to do these things. And so, as an Alexander teacher, I'm very interested in things relating to the body and getting us back into who we are, and our actual physical self. But our physical self is the combination of this and this, our thinking and I put my hand here, we don't feel with our hearts, but our emotions, our gender, the culture that we come from, who we are in our families, our sexuality, our religion, our spirituality, all of these things are what combine to make who you are. And each one of those ways of dividing yourself need to be nurtured and explored and shaped, because they're all equally important. Does that make sense? Okay. It's a little deep. I understand. And as I look back, wait, did this go off? This went off. Oh, the battery's dead. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, great. The battery died. Okay. I'm like, this went off. Dead battery. All right. Good, because now I can not use this one. Let me set this over here. Let me pause here. Do you have questions or reactions or thoughts? Yeah.
Where can we listen to music you played slash what you mentioned?
I'm on Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music and all of those things. Thank you. How do I get this out? Oh. Hello? Okay. Just give me a clarinet. I just want a clarinet. I know what to do. This is so awkward for me. So not my personality. Yeah, I'm on Spotify. And there's 3 albums. Pulse is the one that's just under my name, and the other 2 albums that I've done are under the Tosca Duo name. Yeah, yep. You can stream all of those things. The one thing when I set up Pulse, you can't download Pulse unless you buy the album. And the reason for that is because all of the proceeds from selling the album go to the Pulse Foundation. Any album that I sell, whatever I get from it, I make a yearly donation to the foundation. And we set that up on purpose. Other thoughts, other questions? Yeah.
So did you find your identity more within, while you were working with music? Sometimes I feel like I find more of my identity and sexuality with music, but also sometimes I feel the opposite end, where I feel like I'm backed in a corner of, this is the proper way to do this because you're this, and this is the proper way to do this because you're this. Did you have to cross any big boundary, basically, to have to express yourself?
Yes. I didn't find identity within music. I found it in life, and I found that it was important to bring into music. When I was in graduate school, I took an ethnomusic course, and we were looking at world music and the problem with even calling it world music, right? And I wrote this paper on the role of disco in the development of gay culture and identity and civil rights in the 70s in New York City. And I had to give a presentation in the class, and when I stood up to talk, I suddenly realized I'm talking about my history. And I looked at my professor and I looked at my colleagues and I said, I have to pause for a second. I'm having an emotional response at this moment that I didn't expect. And it was so overwhelming. And I talked about it. I was like, I've just realized that I'm talking about who I am and who came before me so that I could be here today. And my professor, Dr. Douglas, said, I was wondering when that was going to become real to you. He's like, I've been waiting for that and expecting that. It was just completely unexpected. The stage in classical music is so, we don't talk about how to be who you are when you're playing Beethoven or when you're playing Brahms. We talk about this is the correct stylistic shape for a phrase, and these are the right fingerings for you to use, and this is the right rhythm, and fortissimo in 19th century music is very different than fortissimo in 18th century music and 20th century. Like, we learn all of that. But what you don't learn is how to bring you into that. We spend so much time getting everything in the right place, and then once it's in the right place, it's like, okay, now do it musically. There's something very interesting about the brain, and when you're learning, you remember the things that you spent the longest amount of time on, not the shortest. How much time do you spend developing the creativity of the music that you're playing? Which is ultimately what we're trying to do, right? That's something that I've learned in the last 5 years. And I want to say I learned it the hard way. I learned it from life. Because people were brave enough to come up and share with me who they were. And there's something, when you do diversity work, you learn about this thing called representation. And representation is important. I realized that I am a person in the clarinet world that is prominent. I have it's Idaho, but I have one of the few state university jobs, and there's about 100 of them, and there are about 400 people applying for jobs right now. I got the chance of a lifetime. And I'm visible. And I have a responsibility to create a space for people like me to be on stage, and to be on stage as who they are, and not trying to be who people think they're supposed to be, who other people think they're supposed to be. I had to learn that from people like you saying to me, you're creating the space for me. And I never intended for that. But I also had to accept the tremendous responsibility of that. It's my job as an educator and as a person in my field and doing what I do. It changed my life. And I can't even begin to tell you the ways that it changed my life. It just, I could weep right now if I don't kind of pull it back, right? Pull it back, Shawn, pull it back. Because it was so, it just was unexpected. This was me and Carlos working out our own feelings in music. And I never expected it to have the impact that it had. Yeah. Other questions? So what to kind of shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk to you about my particular version of Alexander technique and what I'm learning right now through teaching and learning about the body. How many of you know who Brené Brown is? Okay, y'all are musicians. If you do not know the book, The Gifts of Imperfection, pull out your phone right now, open up Amazon, order it, and have it shipped overnight. And then when you're done with that, order Daring Greatly and have that one shipped second day, because you're going to need to read the first book first. If you don't know this work, this is vital to our field. Brené Brown is a social worker and a researcher. She teaches at the University of Houston, and she has since opened her own company. She went viral about 15 years ago because she did a TED Talk, and she got up there and she talked about shame and vulnerability, and the world went nuts. And her research is about developing authenticity and vulnerability in creative work and in leadership. And her research discovered that in order to do that, we have to be shame resilient, and we have to be deeply courageous, and we have to not pay attention to the people who want to keep us down and the people who criticize us unless they are in the field with us and doing the things that we're doing. The people in the ivory tower do not have the right to tell you anything about what you're doing. You only get to listen to the people who are doing it with you and who are doing what you do, and they continue to do it. Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. She talks a lot. The second to last book that she wrote is called Braving the Wilderness. And it is the reason why we now talk about this word belonging and what belonging means. And if you don't know what belonging means, it's the difference between I accept who you are despite the differences, or I accept who you are and I celebrate the differences. Our group is better because you are different and because you bring your differences to us and we celebrate those differences. That's belonging. And it turns out that our sense of belonging is in fact a sense, like touch, like sight, like smell. You feel belonging physically. It manifests in your body as a sensation, such that how many of you ever experienced not belonging? You feel that, right? You know that you don't belong because you feel it. It's part of your sensory appreciation system. And as an Alexander teacher, that's what we're doing. We're retraining the ability that you have to sense what you're doing and who you are and how you're moving. And for several years now, probably 3 or 4 years now, I've been talking about this work and combining Brené's work with Alexander technique. And just last week, this is when I learned that belonging is actually a sense. I'm not even sure that Brené knows this yet. This was brand spanking new to me. But it actually places her work, which is about shame and is about vulnerability and is about courage, which are all inexplicably connected to belonging. We can't create a culture of belonging unless we're all vulnerable and acting courageously and being authentic and celebrating our authenticity. And it turns out that Alexander technique and the study of Alexander technique and the benefits of studying Alexander technique are one way, and happen to be my way, of developing your own authenticity and developing your own resilience. Anybody talk to you about resilience? You know what that word means? What does that word mean? Yeah. It's your ability to get back up once you've fallen down. Yeah. What's interesting about if we look at like the people who are playing in the top orchestras in the country, we think, wow, they've made it, right? They were successful one time. They failed 50 times. They didn't get the job until they won the job. And then that was it. But they had the resilience to not get the job, and not get the job, and not get the job, and do it over and over and over and over again, and learn, and then do it again, and learn and do it again until they won. One time. We think they're so successful, like they won the job one time. That's it. It's crazy to me to think about that, you know, unless they've moved from one orchestra to the next or something like that. But what do you do right now to develop your own resilience? Think about that for a minute. What do you do? How do you develop that? Anybody know? I don't. I'm learning. I'm trying to figure that out. Apparently, life teaches it to you. It's what I'm discovering. But anyway, that was a sidebar. This work for me right now is about teaching us how to get back to belonging to ourselves. How to know that it's safe to be in our bodies right now, and it's safe to be in our bodies around other people who are also in their body. Because 2.5 years ago, it was not safe for us to be around other people. It was not safe for us to touch other people, to hug other people, to be in the same room with other people. Do you think that affected us? We are social creatures. Human beings are social creatures, and we thrive and require touch. It's essential for us to feel like we are attached to and belong to other people and have relationships. We have to have touch for that. Our nervous system requires it. And we went 2 years, 18 months without that. When you go to hug somebody now, do you stop for a minute and go, oh, it's okay now? Do you experience that little question? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's currently the thought in mental health right now that we are in the greatest depression in human existence. That the entire human race right now is experiencing the largest PTSD that we have ever collectively experienced. And we're not talking about it. So for me, this work is about helping us recover from that and about helping us to come home and feel safe here and thus feel safe here. Does that make sense? So that we can feel comfortable in relationship to other people. Yeah? So let's do just a little bit of work then for a second. I invite you to close your eyes. And I invite you to sense into your body. You don't have to, you can keep your head up. You don't have to drop your head or anything like that. I just invite you to feel the texture of your clothing. To feel the pressure of your clothing around you. To feel the temperature of the room on your skin. To feel the weight of your hair. Or not, in my case. Finally, somebody laughed. Okay. Finally. This is the most serious talk I've ever done in my life. To feel the weight of your glasses sitting on your ears and on your nose. The weight of the hat on your head, or the constriction of the hat around your head. The movement of your back against the chair as you breathe. The way that the air informs you of your nasal spaces as you breathe in. It tells you about the spaces internal to your head. The confinement of your shoes around your toes. The tightness of the elastic on the top of your sock. If you're wearing socks. And then open your eyes. What's that like? What's it like to look around knowing how things are internally? Do you notice something different? I see nodding. What does nodding mean? Speak to me. You're more aware? Everything's a little clearer. Do you feel calmer? Do you feel more present? Did anybody experience anxiety with that? Yeah. Any other thoughts about that? So it's work like that I think is really important for us to settle into ourselves and get to know ourselves in that way. Our strength, our creativity, our ability to connect to other people comes from knowing who we are in that way. And our felt sense of our own body, which is a sense that needs to be trained just like our hearing, just like our sight. Does that make sense? So I encourage you to do that work, to to think about who you are and learn to bring that into what you do. Get curious about how your life and your life experience informs you artistically, so that you can be more whole in what you're doing. Does that make sense to you? I wish that I knew how to do that, or I wish that I knew that that was important and that I didn't have to learn that now. I wish that I didn't have to figure out who is Shawn if Shawn isn't a musician, and be able to put that person much higher in the structure of who I am, because musician was way up here. It was like, I was born, I'm a son and a brother, and then I'm a musician. And then I'm an educator and an artist and all these things. But first was musician, because that was what I was trained. And when that got pulled away, I had to figure that out. I had to figure out who I was. So I just invite you to find ways of incorporating your identity into your work, and let your identity become higher up, and your work become an expression of your identity rather than your work being your identity. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any? Yeah. Mhm. Yes. Yes. My business is called Embodied, and it's a funny spelling. It's the letter M and then BODYED. So it's a play on body mapping, body, M, education, ED. So it's just a play on words, but embodied.com was already taken. So I needed to create something, I can no longer play music, so I need to find some artistic outlet, So I do it in sort of funny ways. But yeah, please do reach out, email me. I'm not here to do a sales pitch, but I have a new cohort that's starting in January, and there's 1 or 2 spots left in it. So, any other? Yeah. Oh, Shawn L. Copeland, I think, AWN. If you look for Shawn L. Copeland, clarinet, pulse, something like that, combination of that, it will come up. Spotify is a new thing for me. I was an Amazon person until about 2 months ago, and then I switched to Apple Music. Yes? The 2 books that I mentioned. The first is The Gifts of Imperfection, and the second is Daring Greatly. And the author is Brené, Brene Brown. These will change your life. You will throw them around, you will cry, you will scream, you will laugh, you will celebrate. Welcome to the club. There's a lot of people who do that work. But for me, all of my students are required to read those books because I think that they're essential for being healthy as a musician. They teach us that the beauty of our art is in the imperfection of it. Otherwise, we'll just turn a CD player on. if we want it perfect, that's what we have recordings for. Yeah. Other thoughts? Okay. Thank you all. Thanks for hanging out.
Hey, okay. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Copeland. Let me talk for just 1 minute about what's happening next week, because next week is not normal. Some of you know that accreditation is this academic term, which means we meet these standards of a larger organization, and we are accredited here at East Tennessee State University by the National Association of Schools of Music. And so we have to send them annual reports. We have to send all sorts of information. When you graduate, I have to send them your transcript that shows what classes you took. And every 10 years, they show up on campus and they dig through everything. And it's good. It holds us to being accountable, and they review the classes that you take and say, hey, this doesn't line up with what everybody else is doing. Not that we should all match. But they also really get excited when we have things like this class. They really loved this class when we submitted this a couple years ago. That was different, bringing all of our music majors together. So every 10 years, like I said, they show up on campus, and this year is the year. So they will be here next Thursday and Friday. It's 2 people. They're just music professors like the rest of us, but they're going to be wandering around. They will be popping in and out of classes next Thursday and Friday. But part of their visit is also they want to hear you perform. They want to know that we are teaching people who can perform. So we're in place of Symposium next week, we're going back to Recital Hour, which those of you who are not new to the program know that that's what we typically do in the spring. So next week will be a Recital Hour. So attendance is still the same, but we're going to have, raise your hand if you're performing next week. So student performers, I'm super excited. So they're going to be representing all of us, no pressure, for the accreditors. So the accreditors are going to watch these student performers and go, hey, you guys know what you're doing. So those of you who have volunteered yourselves as tribute, I really appreciate it. But I need you to come in and support your peers. Please don't support them as like this is a pub crawl, like you know how to behave as a professional audience, right? So the accreditors will be sitting over there. They'll be watching this. They just want to see a performance. And like I said, they are music professors. So those of you who are performing, just like Dr. Copeland was talking about the beauties and the imperfection, if something goes wrong, it's okay. They just want to see what we've got to offer. So that's what's happening next week. It's a little bit different, but you get to enjoy the recital. After the recital, they're going to come talk to you. And I'm going to leave the room. Everybody else is going to leave the room. So there'll be about 20 minutes. The recital should be about an hour, and there should be another 20 minutes or so left over, and they will go beyond that. So if you need to leave at 2:40 next week, that's cool. But if you can stick around and talk to them, they want to talk to you, and they want to hear what you're feeling about the program. So they want to know, do you like the classes you're taking? Do you like the program? And all of that. So that's what's happening next week. They will pop into the band concert a little bit next Thursday. They'll pop into all sorts of things. They're just going to be looking around. And then afterwards, they send me and all of the ETSU faculty report and says, hey, this is what you're doing really well. Here are some things you could change. Okay? So that's who they are. It is really important for us. Like it matters a lot. So please feel free to be honest with them, but please also just do what you need to do, and it's going to be fine. Because if we lose this accreditation, that's not good for us. And I know this may not matter at all to you now. When I was looking at undergrads, I was like, I don't know what accreditation is. It does matter for you when you apply for master's programs, because the people who are accepting you into master's programs are going to look if you went to an accredited university. You are at an accredited university now. But if we lose that, that really affects you going on into grad school. Okay? So that's what's happening. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.